Do not watch this alone. The case you're about to hear was never fully released. Some reports were sealed, some recordings were hidden, and those who entered this house were warned never to speak about what followed them out. This story begins long before the movie, long before the Warrens, long before the haunting had a name. This is the truth behind the real-life Conjuring house, a story far more terrifying than anything you've seen on screen. Our story starts in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Here, on a quiet rural plot of land, stands a farmhouse built way back in 1736. We know it today because of the Perron family, but its history began centuries earlier. It was originally known as the Old Arnold Estate. What most people don't know is that the land itself seems cursed. It has a long documented history of death and tragedy that predates any haunting. If you dig into the old town records, the court documents, the church logs, and the local accounts passed down through generations, a disturbing pattern emerges. There are reports of suicides, some by hanging in the barn. There are stories of accidental drownings in the nearby creek. People froze to death in the harsh New England winters. There are even accounts of poisonings. One man fell and broke his neck. And then there are the children. So many children died on this property, some from unexplained illnesses, others suddenly and without any clear cause. Over the course of 2 centuries, more than 8 generations of families lived and died on this land. Many of them did not leave peacefully. The sheer volume of tragedy became so common that after a while, locals just stopped counting. The land was seen as a place of sorrow, a place where life was unusually fragile. This dark history seeped into the very soil, long before the first ghost was ever seen. So, when the Perron family was looking to buy the property in the early 1970s, the neighbors tried to warn them. They didn't come out and say the place was haunted, not in so many words. The warnings were more subtle, more cryptic. They told Roger Perron, the father, "For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night." They said the house was not empty, that it watched, that it had a life of its own. There were also specific warnings about the women of the house. Old stories claimed that any woman who tried to become the mistress of the estate, to claim it as her own, would be changed by it. They never stayed the same. These weren't tales you'd find in a history book. They were quiet, spoken warnings, passed from one neighbor to another, a local legend that everyone knew but no one wrote down. The Perrons, looking for a peaceful country home to raise their 5 daughters, dismissed these warnings as simple rural folklore. They had no idea they were about to step into a nightmare. In the winter of 1971, Roger and Caroline Perron, along with their 5 girls Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April moved into the old farmhouse. They were completely unaware of the full extent of its dark and violent history. And at first, the house was quiet. It seemed almost welcoming, a charming, rustic home. The first few days were peaceful. The family settled in, excited about their new life in the country. But then, small, unexplainable things began to happen. Doors would creak open on their own, even when they were latched. The family would feel sudden, bone-chilling, cold drafts in rooms that were completely sealed off, with no windows open. Objects would go missing, hairbrush, a book, a child's toy, only to reappear days later in a completely different part of the house, often in a place the family had already searched multiple times. At night, the house came alive. Faint footsteps would echo through the hallways, sounding like someone was walking around upstairs when everyone was in bed. The sounds were distinct, but there was never anyone there. The girls would hear whispering sounds coming from empty rooms, like muffled conversations just beyond a closed door. These early signs were unnerving, but the family tried to rationalize them. It was an old house, they told themselves. Old houses make strange noises. They had no idea this was just the beginning. The house was waking up. The first direct encounters were with the children. They started seeing things in the dark corners of their rooms. They described shapes, vague human-like figures, just standing there, watching them. One of the daughters, Cindy, claimed she saw a presence standing near her bed every night. It didn't move, it didn't speak, it just watched. The parents, Roger and Caroline, did what most parents would do. They dismissed it. They said it was just bad dreams, their imaginations running wild in a new, spooky old house, at first. But then, the experiences became physical. The girls started waking up with unexplained bruises on their bodies. They would find long, thin scratches on their skin, appearing overnight, with no explanation. Some of them described a pulling sensation during the night, as if invisible hands were yanking their legs or their hair while they slept. The whispers they heard before were no longer muffled. They became clearer. The girls heard voices calling their names, but they were voices they didn't recognize. Sometimes it sounded like an old woman, other times like a child. The activity grew more frequent, more bold. The sense of being watched was constant. The family felt like they were never alone. The house was no longer just making noises. It was actively interacting with them. It was no longer quiet. As the family desperately tried to understand what was happening, one name kept surfacing, whispered in local rumors and old stories. The name was Bathsheba Sherman. According to the legends, Bathsheba was a woman who had lived on the property back in the 1800s. She was rumored to be a practitioner of dark arts, a Satanist who had sacrificed her own infant to the devil. Historical records do confirm that a woman named Bathsheba Sherman existed. She lived on the neighboring farm, and records showed that her infant child died under suspicious circumstances. An inquest was held, and the cause of death was determined to be a large sewing needle that had been impaled at the base of the baby's skull. The townspeople were horrified. They believed Bathsheba was responsible, that she had murdered her child in a dark ritual. However, due to a lack of evidence, she was never convicted. The official records deny any ritual murder took place, but the eyewitness accounts and local legends never stopped telling a different story. They claimed that after the death of her child, Bathsheba cursed the land. She declared that she would haunt anyone who dared to live there, and she vowed that no woman would ever peacefully rule the house as its mistress. The locals believed that her spirit remained, appearing as a dark, twisted shape, often seen hovering near beds, especially watching mothers while they slept. They said her presence was one of pure malevolence, and that she was the primary source of the evil that plagued the property. While the official history is clean, the oral history is soaked in blood and fear. This was the entity the Perron family was unknowingly living with. As the paranormal activity in the house intensified, the family's fear turned into genuine terror. They began to fear that someone, one of them, was going to die inside that house. The presence, which they now firmly believed to be the spirit of Bathsheba, became increasingly aggressive, and it seemed to have a target. Its attacks were focused, personal, and aimed directly at the mother, Caroline Perron. Caroline suffered the worst of the physical and psychological torment. She was pinched, slapped, and thrown by an unseen force. On one occasion, she felt a sharp, piercing pain in her leg and looked down to find a bleeding puncture wound, perfectly circular, as if she had been stabbed with something like a knitting needle, eerily similar to the legend of how Bathsheba's infant had died. The spirits seemed to see her as a rival, an invader trying to take her place as the mistress of the house. The family was falling apart under the strain. They were sleep-deprived, terrified, and isolated. Their friends stopped visiting, scared away by the strange occurrences. The family was trapped. It was at this point, when they were at their absolute breaking point, that they made a desperate call for help. And this is when the names Ed and Lorraine Warren entered the story. The famous paranormal investigators were called in to confront the entity tormenting the Perron family. And this, right here, is where the case stops being a local ghost story and becomes one of the most infamous and dangerous paranormal investigations in modern history. The events that followed were so extreme, they were sealed from the public for years. The story of the Perron family haunting is one you think you know. The movie showed us a terrifying tale of possession and a dramatic exorcism. But what if I told you the film barely scratched the surface? What if the real story is far more disturbing, not because of what happened, but because of what was hidden? The truth lies in the details that were deliberately buried, in the evidence that vanished, and in the investigation that was abandoned at its most critical moment. This isn't just about a haunted house. It's about a secret so dark, even the world's most famous paranormal investigators walked away. Our story begins, not with a ghost, but with a piece of paper. Before Ed and Lorraine Warren ever set foot in the old Arnold estate in Harrisville, Rhode Island, they were poring over witness testimonies and the detailed journals kept by Perron. The family had documented years of unsettling events, strange noises, objects moving on their own, and shadowy figures that roamed the halls at night. But when the Warrens finally arrived, their assessment was immediate and chilling. Lorraine, a gifted clairvoyant, didn't just sense a spirit. She felt something far older, far more powerful. She declared the house wasn't just haunted, it was infested. This wasn't the work of a single ghost. It was a congregation of entities, some tied to the land itself, and one malevolent presence that was distinctly inhuman. This wasn't a simple haunting, it was a siege. The Warrens warned the Perron family that they were dealing with something beyond their experience. The primary entity, they explained, had never walked the earth in human form. It was ancient, parasitic, and it had claimed the land long before the house was ever built. The other spirits were its puppets, tormented souls, trapped and manipulated by this dominant force. This crucial detail changes everything. The movie focused on the spirit of a witch named Bathsheba Sherman, but the Warrens' initial findings pointed to something with no name, no history, just a timeless, malevolent hunger. With this situation escalating daily, the Warrens decided to conduct a seance. This wasn't for show. It was a desperate attempt to communicate with and understand the forces at play. The event was held in the heart of the house, with family members and investigators present. It was documented, but what was captured would become one of the most controversial and secretive parts of the entire case. Most of the recordings and notes from that night have never been released to the public. What we know comes from the fragmented, horrified accounts of those who were there. As the seance began, the atmosphere in the room turned toxic. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, coalescing into solid, watching forms. Then, the focus of the malevolent energy turned to Perron. Witnesses described a terrifying transformation. Her voice, once familiar, twisted into a guttural, inhuman sound as she screamed. Her body went rigid, contorting in her chair. Several people present swear she was lifted several inches into the air, held there by an unseen force. The children were rushed out of the room, their screams echoing down the hallway. The investigators struggled to maintain control as chaos erupted. What was said during that seance? What name was spoken? What terrible truths were revealed? The answers remained sealed, locked away in the Warrens' private files, deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. What happened next is perhaps the most unsettling part of this entire story. Immediately following the seance, the Warrens abruptly terminated their investigation. They packed their equipment and left. There was no final cleansing, no exorcism, no resolution for the tormented family. They simply walked away. For a couple who dedicated their lives to confronting evil and helping families, this decision is baffling and deeply disturbing. He spoke of a darkness so profound it threatened not just the family, but everyone involved. Yet, despite this claim, they never went back. What could possibly scare away Ed and Lorraine Warren? The mystery only deepens when you look at the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Following the Warrens' departure, crucial pieces of the investigation began to disappear. The full audio recordings of the seance vanished. Entire sections of their investigation notes went missing. Photographs that allegedly captured paranormal phenomena were lost. Some of the other investigators and witnesses who were present that night were reportedly told by the Warrens not to speak publicly about the specific details of what they saw and heard. The case was never officially closed, it was buried. This wasn't just a lack of resolution. It feels like a deliberate cover-up. It suggests that the truth of what resided in that house was something the world was unready to know. For the Perron family, the Warrens' departure was not the end of their ordeal. It was the beginning of a new, lonely chapter of terror. They continued to live in the house for nearly a decade after the investigation was abandoned. The activity didn't stop. It evolved. It became more personal, more psychological. The family learned to coexist with the horror. Certain rooms were permanently abandoned. Areas of the house were never entered after dark. The nighttime activity, once sporadic, became a constant, terrifying ritual. Doors would slam, disembodied voices would whisper from empty corners, and the feeling of being watched was relentless. Even after they finally managed to sell the house and move away, the experience followed them. Some of the Perron children, now adults, have admitted that they still feel the presence of that house, a lingering shadow that has never truly left them. They feel watched, even decades later. And what of the house today? The old Arnold estate still stands in Harrisville, Rhode Island, a silent monument to the secrets it holds. It has passed through several owners since the parents left. The current owners are intensely private and refuse to allow overnight paranormal investigations. They are tired of the attention, but perhaps there's another reason. Rumors persist that some rooms in the house are kept permanently locked. Visitors and passersby often report a sudden, intense feeling of dread as they approach the property. Electronic devices like phones and cameras are known to malfunction without explanation. And the most common report, from tourists to delivery drivers, is the overwhelming sensation of being watched from the windows of the empty house, of unseen eyes following your every move. The house remembers, and it doesn't like visitors. So why, after all these years, does this case still haunt us? It's because the true horror of the Harrisville haunting isn't in the story we were told, but in the one we weren't. It's in the unanswered questions. What was on those missing tapes? What was so terrible that it had to be hidden? Lorraine Warren herself once hinted that there were details about the case that were never meant for public consumption, details that were unbelievably ugly. But the reality is, a story with no ending, a darkness that was never conquered. It suggests that what the Perron family faced was not just a ghost, but something primordial and unknowable. And if that's true, then the movie didn't just simplify the story. It protected us from it. It only showed us what we were allowed to see. The real story remains locked away, in the dark, in a house that still stands on a quiet country road, waiting. Some houses don't need demons. They are born from a darkness that was always there, and they remember everything. Thank you for watching. If you want to explore more stories that delve into the shadows of the unknown, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Every story has a dark side, and we're here to find it.